It's a midway point of the season for the Heat. So to help us make sense of what's happened and what comes next, we're joined by Rohan Nadkarni of Sports Illustrated to help us get ready for the next 41 games. Who starts? Who finishes? Is a trade necessary? So many great questions answered on a great show you won't want to miss.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Fancy video graphics now? What is going on here? What is that?
I told you we're YouTubers now.
Whoa! I would have worn a suit.
Instead, you wore the Panthers hat. So
yeah,
that's almost as close.
Hat. Yeah.
All right. Well, hello, Heat Nation. Anyway, it's a Friday edition of Locked On Heat, your daily podcast covering all things Miami Heat. However, you may be listening on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm David Ramil, and with me, as always, is my co-host Wes Goldberg. We've had a great week following Miami's best win of the season in Phoenix. Interviews with Kyle Guy and Mario Chalmers. So please check those out if you haven't already, but you absolutely should have by now. But with 41 games out of the way, it's time to assess this team and what's next for them. And who better to do that than one of the best people in the business, our great friend of the show, Rohan Nadkarni of Sports Illustrated. How are you, my friend?
I'm great. Good to see you guys have been thriving despite Wes's re-addition to the podcast.
It was a rocky incorporating him at first, but it's worked out, Considering we did the pod for 3 years before that, it wasn't all that
right.
But yeah, man, we're glad to have you back. What do you? I guess we'll just jump right into it. How are you? First of all, you're doing great. Everything good?
Cannot complain. Everything's going well.
Good. What do you think of this Miami Heat season so far? Because full disclosure, we're recording this on a Wednesday before they take on the Atlanta Hawks for the first of a back-to-back set there. But at this point, 25-15, looking like they're showing some improvement. Finally getting some players back, although Jimmy Butler still ruled out against the Hawks on Wednesday night. We'll see how soon he returns. But what are your thoughts of the Heat season so far?
I mean, David, you and I did the podcast at the start of the season going over what's our biggest fear for this team. And I remember vividly we said, are the guys like Gabe Vincent, Max Strus, KZ Okpala, are they going to be able to step up?
Right.
And I think that's been the story of their season. They've gotten contributions that I think even in their wildest dreams, they could not have expected from some of the guys lower in the depth chart. The Vincents, the Struses, even you mentioned you guys interviewed Kyle Guy. He had his moments as a 10-day player. And it's just been remarkable. I mean, Omer Yurtseven, the fact that this team's been able to stay afloat, I don't think that you can necessarily draw conclusions yet about this team. I'm sure we'll get there, not to get ahead of ourselves, but it's just been remarkable what they've been able to accomplish with all the lineup turmoil that Eric Spoelstra's had to deal with.
Yeah, I think that, the coaching job that Eric Spoelstra has done has clearly put him in position to be at least a Coach of the Year candidate. And I don't know, it's crazy what this guy is able to do time and time again with injuries and things like that. I actually feel like he maybe is injuring people on purpose just to try to do something. I think he's like, you know what, Bam Adebayo, you don't need that thumb, and whatever it is. But I don't know. My biggest thing with them is, all right, obviously depth was a big question coming into the season like you were talking about, but now that it appears to at least be a strength, how do you sort of incorporate all these guys into the rotation? How do you combine two different styles of play? Because you had a different like in the beginning of the year, we're all talking about, wow, Miami doubling down on the mid-range game with Jimmy and Bam and their defensive first, rebounding, slow down the tempo, all this stuff. And now with Strus and Duncan Robinson, Caleb Martin and Gabe Vincent, all these three-point shooters just coming off the bench now, how do you incorporate them, not just from a body standpoint, because we're talking about 11 or 12 guys who you might want to get minutes for, but also just from a playing style standpoint? I don't think it's easy. I think it's probably a good problem to have, but it's not an easy one to solve if you're Spo.
It's definitely not. And I was, I tweeted about this, and everyone, all the Twitter coaches are crawling out of the woodwork, like, oh, it's easy. You just do this. You just play drive and kick. And I'm like, if it was that easy, Spo, I think, would have had an answer for their half-court offense early in the season, because early in the season, the half-court offense wasn't very good. And, the offensive rating was high, but they were kind of pushing ahead and, with Kyle Lowry throwing those hit-ahead passes, et cetera. And the offense was starting to teeter a little bit before guys started to go out with injuries. You remember the start of that first West Coast trip against the LA teams. So I'm with you, Wes. I think it's a good problem to have, but it's a very interesting one because, Caleb Martin, I think, has made an argument for why he should be closing games, especially because of what he can do on the defensive end, picking up guards 94 feet, often starting games out on the other team's best perimeter player. I think Max Strus has made an argument for why he should be closing games. I mean, his shooting is just impossible to ignore at this point. And, his size makes him a little bit more versatile defensively. And then obviously, you have Tyler Herro at the same time, who is probably the sixth man of the year. Yeah. How do you keep him off the floor in the fourth quarter? But you only have 5 spots. In a playoff series, Kyle, Bam, and Jimmy are going to be out there. I think PJ Tucker's been the second most important player on the team so far this season. Are you going to take him off the floor in a playoff series? I think they are in a trickier position than people realize because Spo doesn't have a ton of time to test out all these different lineup combinations. And beyond that, their offense, it's going to be – you cannot expect them to keep playing offense the way they've played. As great as the shooting has been, it's that Phoenix game, that was a great game. They're not going to shoot like that every night. So they're in a little bit of a tricky position in terms of figuring out the right combos.
Yeah, just to kind of double down on what you're talking about here, it's like we're kind of having there's the only one ball conversation, and people are like, really? You're having the only one ball conversation about Max Strus and Caleb Martin? But it's interesting because what Miami's best players do,
conflicts.
They're not great 3-point shooters, but they're the best players, and they're undoubtedly the best players on the team. They're kind of fringe rotation guys. Those are the guys that are opening up the floor for their best players. So it's not really hey, there's only one basketball conversation. It's, hey, you're only allowed to play 5 guys. And it almost feels like the Heat would have better spacing if they could play 7 or 8 guys on the court at one time in a weird way. This is a weird thing to do because do you sit a superior player for maybe a worse player who can at least help you continue this 3-point shooting trend that the Heat have been getting on? That's the tough question for Spo.
I don't think it's that tough. I think the answer is pretty clear. I think he'd love to be able to play the way where we saw against Phoenix, but there's no way that Jimmy's minutes are getting cut or that Bam's minutes are going to get cut. It's just a matter of them kind of understanding how to play to their strengths, which is what Spo always says. Is like we always lean into our strengths. What we do well is what we're going to continue to do moving forward. And yes, while he'd like to see some variety of that, again, the recurring theme in our discussion so far is that it's a good problem to have. But I don't know.
Jimmy and Bam, no, I think you're right. Like you want to lean into what they do well, but also you want to keep I love the 40-point 3-point attempts a game target. I think that's ideally where they should be, like 38 to 43s a game, and they just weren't doing that with Jimmy and Bam. Per 48 minutes with Jimmy and Bam, 32.2 3-point attempts per game when those two are on the floor. And the Heat are shooting 28.8% from 3-point range. In other words, bad on a low volume and bad. Per 48 minutes without Jimmy or Bam Adebayo on the court, they're shooting 38.5 3-point attempts per game or per 48 minutes and 40.4% from 3-point range. That is an enormous difference. And I think in today's game, it's worth answering the question is, would you rather have that mid-range stuff with Jimmy and Bam, or would you rather just be, to use Rohan's kind of lingo here, spamming the 3-point line over and over again because it's been proven to work in today's math? It's sort of a math problem in a weird way. And I don't know. I think I'll throw it out here to the group. Earlier in the year when Jimmy and Bam were healthy, they were kind of playing a lot of minutes together. My first inclination is just to sort of split them up, maybe stagger their minutes. You kind of have one of those guys because Jimmy can drive and kick, and then Bam can obviously facilitate out of the low post and from 3-point line and everywhere on the floor. So is maybe that the answer, that you only have one of Jimmy and Bam on the court at all time and you just surround those guys with shooters?
Yes and no. I will say one thing that could maybe help things is when Bam is on the floor, if you look at the Jimmy and Dedmon minutes, Jimmy and Dedmon have great chemistry. I think that Jimmy and Dedmon, that pairing has a better net rating than Jimmy and Bam. I'm sure someone will fact check me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty confident that that's true. One thing I wonder is, do you take less, do you put less on Bam's plate? Do you ask him to play more similarly to a Dedmon, to a Yurtsevin, and it's you're just setting screens and diving hard? Do you take away some of that DHO game? Do you take away some of that, operate out of the mid post? Do you maybe try to ask him to do a little bit less, play a more narrow role, and see if you can kind of goose the offense that way? Because a funny thing about the success that you've had with the with Dedmon or Yurtsevin, especially Yurtsevin lately on the floor, is they play a very narrow, defined role in a way that Bam does not. I know some people are maybe clamoring to play two bigs at the same time. I don't think that's the answer for this team. But I think that's an interesting suggestion, Wes, staggering them. And that's another thing. It just comes down to, do they have time to run all these kinds of experiments? I think that, in just a, David, I'll let you speak here in a second. I know that I'm really rambling here, but it just comes to mind immediately. Like, they can test out staggering Jimmy and Bam. They can test out closing with Caleb. They can test out closing with Duncan. They can test out closing with Strus. They can test out not closing with PJ. And amidst all of that, they still need to find their hammer lineup. That's what it comes down to. Is you look at all the other teams around the league, they have that lineup that is like a 12 to 15 net rating that just blows teams off the door when on the floor. The Heat have a couple of those lineups, but most of them don't feature all their best guys. And that's, I think, the biggest challenge for Spo moving forward. Does he have the time to find it?
Yeah, no, that's well said. I don't know if staggering seems like the most ideal option also, but I can't see Bam changing his role, because everybody's been clamoring for him to be more aggressive offensively. It just seems so contradictory to who he is as a player and what makes him special, that I just don't see him evolving into a lesser role, even if it might be more beneficial for the team. Like, I'm sure consciously he'd be more willing to accept whatever it takes in order for this team to win, because that's his primary goal. But just the way he's wired and the way he plays, I just don't see him changing that approach, because he's just so gifted as a natural playmaker. But I was curious, because I know we've talked about this before on the show, but Rohan, I wanted to get your take. Who have they missed the most out of Jimmy Butler or Bam Adebayo? Because I think the answer is pretty obvious, but I'm curious to hear what you have to say about it.
I mean, first of all, it's really hard to say they've missed either of them, just considering how successful the team has been.
Trade them both.
I believe 10-4 without Jimmy and Bam, I believe, which is pretty crazy. I think Lowry's been their MVP this season. He's been the glue. He's been the linchpin, the most important player for them. So if I had to pick, oh gosh, I mean, I think just because of the nature of the shooting they've had, it's probably been Bam that they've missed more. Also because of how thin the front court is. Some of these games, it's Apollo when he was healthy playing the backup five, PJ having to play a little bit of center, but not too much. That's a look I hope we get to see maybe a bit more of in the playoffs. But I would say Bam, just because of how thin the front court has been and how good the shooting has been. I mean, the Heat have gotten lucky in the sense that at least one of Strus, Vincent, Robinson, or Herro has seemingly been hot every night when in Jimmy's absence. And a hot shooter can go a long way in making up for missing Jimmy. Their defense has slipped. I will say that. But, I mean, if I had to pick, I would say Bam. I mean, obviously, this is a real splitting hairs question.
No, I agree with you 100%. Like, even Caleb Martin, I think, has been able to reproduce a lot of what Jimmy brings to the table, which would have been an unfathomable statement at the start of the season. And yet here we are, where a lot of people are saying, you know what, he's a long-term keeper, a Heat lifer, if you will, moving forward.
Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline would like to wish you a happy new betting year as we continue our march to the playoffs and beyond. BetOnline remains the #1 spot for all of the best sports wagering action for 2022. New year and a new updated desktop and mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. All you have to do is use the promo code LOCKEDON to get started. From football, basketball, hockey, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage on all of these amazing offers available for 2022. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all of your favorite sports. It's BetOnline, where the game starts.
Well, we saw a new wrinkle in the Phoenix Suns game that I think has a lot of Heat fans torn apart here, which is what happens to the starting lineup moving forward. Do you continue to go with Max Strus or Duncan Robinson? And we discussed this. I took some heat from, no pun intended, about Duncan, because I don't know exactly what it is that Max necessarily does significantly better. than Duncan Robinson, and yet a lot of people are saying it's time to trade Duncan, etc. And Max is the clear option moving forward. So I'll put it to you. What do you think about that? And who continues to get the nods moving forward?
I think everyone needs to cool their jets about Duncan Robinson. That means
no, you're wrong.
That means
trade him. Trade him. He's a
means
bum.
that means
Sorry.
Leif. Okay, Leif over at 5 Reasons. Stop trying to trade him every night. That means like whoever at Heat Beat is upset that night. Stop trying to trade him. Okay.
Never heard of him.
All of you guys are bums. I don't understand the rush to trade a guy that has proven in the playoffs that he could stay on the floor in important moments, help this team make the finals. Jimmy's first year when the Heat made the finals, It is hard to overstate the importance of Duncan Robinson to that group and how poorly Jimmy and Bam played offensively when he was off the floor. And, when we talk about some of their half-court shooting struggles, a lot of that was, I think he was in a pretty big slump there to start the season. For what it's worth, since December 1st, Duncan's shooting over 40. I mean, just barely. I think he's shooting close to 41% from three, around 40.5, something like that. That's right where he was last season. That's an incredible number on the volume of attempts that he's taking. It's very hard to shoot 40% from three in the NBA. And credit to Duncan. He said this week, I'll come off the bench. I'll do whatever's necessary. That's professionalism. That's being a great teammate. That's buying in, doing whatever it takes to win. But I think that he should continue to start. I think he has great chemistry with Bam and Jimmy. I think that now that he's shooting the way that people expect him to shoot, he's going to open up that half-court offense for the Heat. And he's also improved a lot defensively. I know I mentioned it too. Strus's size, I think, makes people really excited about what he can do on that end of the floor. But I think Duncan's a great team defender, generally is in the right place, good at using his length, can stay in front of guys. And I just think people need to relax with Duncan. I understand that, people start using the trade machine and his contract works in a lot of scenarios, blah, blah, blah. Like, listen, this is a good team. He's gonna have his moments where he contributes. People just need to take a deep breath and relax. But I don't think he's the kind of guy you give up on halfway through a season.
No, there's this weird thing happening with Heat fans, or I don't know, maybe it's a vocal minority on Twitter or just like a trade machine thing. But look, first of all, the slump that he was in to start the season, that becomes a narrative. And then people don't look at the numbers that Rohan is talking about, since he's been awesome. And by the way, even during the slump, all the advanced metrics said that the Heat were better with Duncan Robinson on the floor than off the floor. He still is a floor spacer in a meaningful way that defenses will pay attention to. NBA teams are smart and opponents are smart, and the scouting report doesn't change just because a guy is in a slump. It still will say, going into every Heat game, close out hard on Duncan Robinson, even if he's 33 feet away from the basket. And so opponents treat him like that. And I don't know what this obsession about trading him is. It's almost like Heat fans can't fathom having more than one good three-point shooter on the roster. Like, I don't know if this is just, do we blame like the days of Jason Capono and Wayne Ellington? Like those days where the Heat were just like, it was a one three-point shooting specialist team. And like Heat fans are conditioned to just have one good three-point shooter on the team at all times. Because in today's NBA, you want to have multiple. Like, Gabe Vincent is a good three-point shooter. Caleb Martin is like shooting 37% from three lately, and you don't see people trying to trade them. I just see that like people just are kind of pigeonholing Duncan Robinson and Max Strus, I think for a very obvious reason, that as just three-point specialists, and they're more than that. Both players are more than that. I don't think that Duncan Robinson needs to, quote, add more to his game and start getting a mid-range game like people want. I don't know why you would want a guy who's shooting 40% from three taking mid-range shots. The math is always the reason we take 43s in a game now in the NBA is because the three is worth more than the mid-range shot. So
Duncan, just to give people context, Duncan Robinson would have to shoot 60% on mid-range twos to make it more valuable for him to shoot, the threes that he's shooting since December 1st. That's how good he is as a three-point shooter. And I'll add to that. He holds up defensively. He can be part of a good defensive team as well. He's proven that. It's frustrating. He's not. People think his contract is like some kind of crazy albatross. It's not. I don't think, unless for some insane reason, some team is really willing to part. Like, the Pistons aren't just going to give up Jeremy Grant, okay? And I don't even know that he's as clean of a fit as people. Like, some people just get so obsessed with trades. Like, I don't think they need to mess with this team. I think they're playing pretty well.
No,
Well,
I
that
think the
kind of
big addition is Victor Oladipo, right? Is
Yeah.
that what you're going to talk about, David?
Yeah, exactly. I was going to segue into that because I think everybody's looking at the trade deadline and, of course,
Mhm.
Oladipo's return, the buyout market, who they keep of these 10-day guys, that extra roster spot that is this tantalizing mystery box there. And is there a move that's necessary for this team to prove that they are elite title contenders? Because we had this discussion on a recent show. We keep coming back to the fact that they look deeper than any team in the NBA, and that's saying something when every team has been tested in a similar fashion. But what's your opinion as far as whether or not an additional roster move needs to be made for this group?
I just don't know what is out there that is realistic because at the end of the day,
Sure.
let's just, if we're getting down to brass tacks and it's the last 6 minutes of a playoff game, the Heat of 4 guys that they know for sure are going to be on the floor, and Kyle, PJ, Bam, and Jimmy. And that's a hell of a 4 to have on the floor in
Well,
a
how
playoff
about
game.
this? I mean, we saw what happened with PJ Tucker last year with Milwaukee, where he was virtually unplayable. Can that be something that happens again this season? It feels like such a long time ago, and PJ has been. Well, go ahead.
I wouldn't say he was unplayable. I think even in the finals, the Bucks will tell you how important he was. I think that offensively, they asked him to play a certain role in Milwaukee that he hasn't been asked to play in Milwaukee, and we've seen him offensively have arguably the best season of his career. So
Yep.
I'm not worried about that in the slightest. I think that he played the role for the Bucks that they asked him to play, and I think everyone in Milwaukee would tell you he was an essential part of that team down the stretch. He just he had some poor offensive nights. But I think that they have a hell of a 4 to put on the floor in a playoff series. Very few teams have 4 guys like that who can be so effective on both ends of the floor. So now you're looking at, can we make a trade for a 5th guy that's going to dramatically alter our ceiling? And that's where it comes down to. I don't know what realistic options there are that you're going to get someone to fill that 5th spot that's going to radically alter. Because you get Gabe Vincent. Really what it comes down to in the playoffs is, can you get guys who are going to survive on both ends of the floor? I think Gabe Vincent can survive defensively and make enough threes in a playoff series. I think Caleb Martin can survive defensively and maybe make enough threes in a playoff series. Then you add in Strus. They have guys that I think can belong. And if anything, the depth is going to give them options. One night, it's not Duncan's night, they can try Strus. It's not Strus's night, they can try Martin, etc. And then there's the Oladipo of it all, who gives them, I think, another kind of two-way threat. So, if Jeremy Grant, they can somehow, but I just don't see that happening. No. And I don't love that fit. He's not a good rebounder. He's certainly not the floor spacer that Strus or Robinson is. I don't know that I don't know that he's going to help the half-court offense. So I think that they have enough to borrow a Sposim. I think that they have enough because they're not going to magically, finagle a star out of thin air.
Well, to kind of get back to that hammer lineup question, because I think it's a good one, and we don't really talk a lot about it. You mentioned the 4, Bam, Jimmy, PJ, and Lowry, and I think I agree with you. And I guess at the end of the game, you would put Tyler Herro in that 5th spot. But even with
Oladipo,
Oladipo if he's healthy. But it kind of gets back to that thing. It's like, all right, who's the floor spacer in that lineup? Like I don't really know. I think theoretically you'd say, well, Lowry, Tucker, and Oladipo, but you're not really threatened by them the way you are a Duncan Robinson or Strus or even like a Tyler Herro who's been making a ton of off the dribble threes this season. And Bam is not a 3-point shooter. Jimmy is. You don't really want him taking threes. So. It gets back to that same question. I don't know. Another part of me wonders, is it Bam, Jimmy, Duncan, Tyler, Lowry, and PJ comes off the floor? And maybe you're right. Maybe it's matchup dependent, but I just feel like this team has enough good players where maybe it shouldn't be. Like, what if Spo had his way? What would be the closing 5, regardless of matchup? I don't know that he even knows the answer to that question.
I think that's their biggest question. I don't know what their best 5 is, and I agree. It sounds crazy. Maybe you take PJ off the floor, but he's just been so good this season.
So good. He's been so good. But it goes back to the thing. It's like the Heat's best players their best 5 players in a vacuum might not be the best 5
together. Agreed.
I mean, their most used lineup this year has only played 185 minutes together. And by the way, it's the projected starting lineup.
Yeah, and you look at that lineup's been okay, but that lineup should be better. That lineup that is what worries me about the Heat. Yes. Is can that group get it together offensively?
It's Lowry, Butler, Duncan, PJ and Bam. They're plus 8.6 in 185 minutes. The trio of Lowry, Butler, and Bam, just the new big three, they're only plus 4.5 points.
Which is a little bit concerning to me. Now, granted, the problem is this has all been skewed with that was just from their first 14 games together. That starting lineup where you substitute Tyler for Duncan has been awful, but that's the same lineup that blew a couple huge leads against the Jazz. So is that throwing off the stats? That lineup, Tucker, Butler, Adebayo, Robinson, Herro, minus 22 net rating, an 83 offensive rating. That just seems like it's not sustainable. But is it a good lineup? We don't know. And that's really the problem. They have one lineup that's played over 100 minutes. And even you look at some of their top lineups right now, Deadman's in 2 of the top 3. He hasn't played in a few weeks. Adebayo's in their 4th most used lineup. He hasn't played in weeks. I don't know how they're going to find the right combination, and I don't know how they're going to find that lineup. And it might be that they just roll with that starting 5 and try to grind out playoff games, and it's ugly, and maybe it's doable, but I just don't know, because you could take PJ off the floor, but I think PJ's given you enough spacing this season that I don't know that he's going to dramatically change it.
He's shooting like 40% and 50% from the corners.
Heck with the spacing. It's that floater that's deadly, and nobody expected to be a part of his offensive repertoire. I don't know.
Well, I think it's at the beginning of the year, the Heat's identity, right? Like if there was a mission statement for the Miami Heat, it was we're going to rebound the crap out of the ball. We're going to play awesome defense in the half court and in transition, and then we're just going to we're going to play the mismatches offensively. And that starting 5 still gets you there. And that closing 5, whatever, the hammer lineup, it still gets you there. But I don't think that they anticipated having so many great 3-point shooters coming off the bench and kind of finding this new formula. So how do you incorporate that first formula with this new formula? And you're right, Rohan, to go back to your earlier point, they only have half the season to do it. 41 games, 25 of which are going to be at home. It's a really easy schedule. I think it's the third easiest schedule over the final 41 games in the league. So it's going to be a little bit softer here. They finally play some home games. So in that respect, it makes it a little bit easier to experiment. You can practice at home a little bit more than maybe you did at the beginning of the season. I think the Heat have had like 2 or 3 total practices for the whole first half of the season. You probably expect that to be a little bit more going forward, but I don't know.
It just feels like we know what Spo's going to do, right? He's always going to lean favorably towards a more defensive-minded lineup, which is why he's going to continue to incorporate Jimmy and Bam, even if they're not necessarily the best options for that free-flowing offense. And if given that, then it's just a question of whether or not you lean more defensively or offensively. And with Spo, we know what the answer is. So it's he'll go down with that same group no matter what. And I think he'll try to find a way of incorporating a new player. Like, okay, how about this? Given what we saw last time when they made this deep run in the finals and they were incorporating Jay Crowder into that lineup, is there another switch that they could do that would have the same similar impact as that season? Because I don't think there is. Like if you bring in Max as a starter in place of PJ Tucker or somebody like that, or Tyler, would that create the same kind of impact?
No, I think Tucker is the new Crowder, right? Like they've been trying to double down on that
and
model.
Listen, Tucker's been great. It's going to be interesting because I think at the end of the day, they still match up really well with the teams they need to match up with. I really hope they play the Bucks for a third time. I just think that would be a lot of fun. I know that because it feels like the Heat beat the Bucks, so the Bucks go out and get Drew Holiday. Then the Heat get embarrassed, so they go out and get Kyle Lowry. Right. And now they have, Tyler makes a huge leap forward, etc. I still think at the end of the day, the reason why PJ is going to be on the floor is the defensive, you mentioned the defensive versatility. That's what they're going to need against the Nets and the Bucks. I think you'd rather have a chance defensively and try to grind out some offensive possessions. I'm with Spo on that, but it's going to be really interesting. And I am so ready for the playoffs. I hate to say it because the season's been a lot of fun, but I'm dying to see those 4 guys in that moment, in that high pressure, where every closeout is life or death scenario. It's going to be a lot of fun.
I still think when push comes to shove, Spo trusts the guys who have been there. And I don't, I still, as good as Vincent and Strus and Caleb Martin have been, I think if we're talking about like second round, third round of the playoffs, I don't know if they're getting minutes.
Yeah, I'm with you. Because on one hand, I'm like, maybe they just go on big bench runs and that's how but that just doesn't happen in the playoffs.
No.
That's just not as important in the playoffs. Not when all your starters are going to be pushing 40 minutes. So it's really
and you want that mid-range game of Jimmy in the playoffs,
Yes,
right? This is what we keep
yes.
talking about is all this. They got to figure out a way to tick up the 3-point shooting rate, but you still want in the postseason Jimmy Butler bullying a smaller guard on a switch, getting 15, 16 feet away from the rim and hitting a turnaround jumper. Like that's really at the end of the day what the Heat are built for. And if it works out best case, they could kind of do both on their way up to the postseason. But at the very least, you've got Jimmy Butler. Today's episode is brought to you by Built Bar. It's the new year, so that means New Year's resolutions. If yours is about getting fit or eating right, make sure you include Built Bar in your plan. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, maybe even better than a candy bar. Built Bar makes it easy to stick to your resolution because it tastes so good, you're going to want to eat it. Unlike other protein bars, which could be chalky or waxy or taste like a chemical spill, if you want to eat healthy, sometimes it just gets boring. By like week 3, you might be thinking, this is just not worth it. Where's the chocolate? Well, Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate, and most Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and packed with 17 grams of protein. Compare that to a candy bar, which usually has twice as many calories, way more grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. There are so many flavors to choose from. They have coconut almond, peanut butter brownie, raspberry, cookies and cream, salted caramel, mint brownie, and many more. In fact, Built Bar is always coming out with new limited time flavors, so check out Built.com often to see what's new. Here's the offer. Go to Built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15, and get 15% off on your order. Again, use that promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Do we have mailbag questions?
Yeah, we do have a couple. Let's get into it. Well, how about we'll start off with this one. Of the top teams in the Eastern Conference, which one is the most difficult challenge for Miami to ascend to an NBA title? And which one is the easiest team to beat for Miami?
There's no team that's easy to beat. I don't even know how to answer that question. I will say most difficult. I think it's going to be Brooklyn.
Yeah. Still over Milwaukee.
I go back and forth. I think that Milwaukee is probably who I have as the favorites to make it out of the East. I just think that Brooklyn is a nightmare, man. If Irving does end up getting vaccinated, which is an insane just thing to have to say, when those 3 guys were healthy in the playoffs last year, it was lights out, even for Milwaukee. They had 2 huge wins against Milwaukee with their guys hurt. I just think that they are terrifying. Patty Mills has been fantastic. What a pickup he was for them. I mean, right now their defense has slipped, and they've had guys in and out of the lineup. Joe Harris is hurt, but
yeah.
I don't know. It's so hard to pick between the Bucks and the Nets. Both of those are going to be absolute mountains to climb.
Yeah, and there's a world where the Heat have to play both of them and get through both of them if they want to go to the NBA Finals. I'm with you. I think it's Brooklyn just because of sheer talent. We keep PJ Tucker, he could guard Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant still scored 40 points a game in that series or whatever it was, with PJ Tucker doing a great job defending him. And then if you add Kyrie to the mix, James Harden, obviously. Harden isn't what he was in Houston, but you still have 3 guys who could space the floor, create off the dribble. They obviously have depth concerns, but if Brooklyn can get healthy, I mean, I think that's ultimately where Miami would have some sort of advantage is with depth. But Brooklyn, with all 3 guys, if they get all 3 guys available, can put a star on the court at all times who can change the game and who has proven to play well in the playoffs, at least in the case of 2 of their stars. So, I'm with you. I think it's Brooklyn.
I made this point on a recent Locked On NBA show. Like, everybody's scared of the big 3 in Brooklyn, but is anybody scared of the team Brooklyn themselves? And I don't know that they are, because of those other concerns. And the fact that we've seen any one of those players can succumb to injury. And maybe that's the case for every team and every superstar, but I just don't know that they necessarily mesh as well as we keep expecting to be. Everybody thinks that, yes, what we've seen of them so far has been great. But is that necessarily a guarantee? And I'm not so sure that it is. But anyway, yeah, I think both teams are difficult. Rohan, you kind of skirted this issue. You don't want to say which one of the teams is easiest for Miami to knock off.
Is it just playoff teams in the question? Is that what the
question?
I
don't even know if that,
Yeah, the top teams like Philadelphia, Chicago, Milwaukee, etc. Which one of those teams is easiest for
People
Miami?
just get ahead of themselves. Like people just get ahead of themselves. Like no, there's no team that's easy to beat. Okay, I'm sure like Locked On Philadelphia is like the Heat. We're gonna smoke those guys in the playoffs. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
No team is easy to beat.
Wow. All right.
Philadelphia would be easy to beat.
Yeah, all right, there we go. Good job, Tim. Good job, Wes. All right, this question comes in from Narayana, and he asks, between Omer, Gabe, Max, and Caleb, who, in your opinion, will the Heat find most difficult to retain long term, and who can they not afford to lose? So you got Omer, Gabe, Max, and Caleb.
I haven't looked up most of their contract situations. I feel like probably
Gabe and
They're all
Max.
in those. They're all
Gabe
those
and Max are
2-year
those
deals.
non-guaranteed next
Yeah.
year, right? So
Right,
they have one more year at least of all those guys, right? Except Caleb.
No, not Caleb. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, who they have to. So I think that by default will make Caleb the hardest to re-sign. I do think of all those guys. I mean, it's tough. First of all, Vincent's proven to be the backup point guard they've needed for years. I don't know how you could lose him. I think Caleb's the best two-way player, so I don't know how you could lose him. And I think Strus is the best shooter, so I don't know how you can lose him. It's going to be tough. Maybe there's a way they were able to keep all those guys, but frankly, I think they're all going to be hard to retain. And
you can make the case for Omer too, right? If you've maxed out now Bam Adebayo and you're spending all that salary on one player on that position, there's value in retaining Omer at some sort of reasonable cost as a bona fide backup center. Backup centers you could still usually find on the minimum. Like there's a Dwayne Dedmon out there every year. I'm with you. I don't really know.
I was here. You said Gabe's the backup point guard that we haven't had in a long time. Theoretical situation, if Goran becomes available, do they keep Goran in place of Gabe Vincent at this point in their respective careers?
I don't think that you can swap them out. It'd be great if they could have both, but I don't know that that's going to happen.
Yeah. All right. That's interesting because I know a lot of people would be very hopeful that he'd be able to find his way back to Miami, but that's.
There's also something to say about Gabe's smaller contract and the fact that he's much better defensively than Goran Dragic, which might be something that this team needs.
Yeah.
All right, last question here. Let's imagine an 8-man playoff rotation with Tyler Herro, Duncan Robinson, and Yurtseven coming off the bench. Who is your starting five? So Herro, Duncan, and Yurtseven on the bench.
He took out a starter.
I'm guessing this question came after the Phoenix game since then.
It wouldn't shock me to see Caleb Martin close some playoff games if his three-point shooting sustains. That's but it's also, it can't just be that it sustains. It has to be that teams guard him. And if they don't guard him, he's going to have to hit them in the playoffs. So it wouldn't shock me to see him on the floor at the end of some playoff games, even if they just go offense, defense with him. But I also don't think Yurt is going to be in the playoff rotation. I think it'll be Dedmon.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Caleb Martin might of all these guys has the best chance to get into the playoff rotation because of his ability to defend on the ball and the fact that depending on what Oladipo looks like when he comes back, like if Oladipo is not the on-ball stopper that you're hoping he is, then who is, right? I don't know that you want to put Jimmy Butler in those situations because of what you're going to need from him offensively, and his help defensively is almost more valuable than it is guarding ball handlers. But do you want to put Lowry in those situations? I don't know that you do. The Heat have actually said that they don't because they'd prefer to put Caleb Martin on guys like Steph and Damian Lillard and De'Aaron Fox than Kyle Lowry. So I think you could put Caleb in those positions. He's I don't remember who made this point first. It was you or me or David, but it kind of feels like Caleb Martin is the new Derrick Jones Jr. He's going to be playable in certain matchups in the postseason and maybe not in other ones. But he's definitely a better three-point shooter.
I would be interested to see Caleb. I don't think Spo would ever do this. I'd be interested to see Caleb start a couple games just to see what Herro and Robinson could do, kind of just going after other teams' benches. I think some people have raised the point. Maybe it's helping Duncan come off the bench and kind of get his rhythm against other teams' backups. I don't know how true that is. It'd be interesting, though. I'd be interested to see kind of Herro and Robinson just launching off the bench and seeing what that does. But I don't know how realistic that is.
Can we end it on this one last question? Those were all the mailbag questions, right?
Yeah, basically.
Basically, or do we have more?
I didn't know. No. I'm sorry. I thought we have another one, but it was a silly question about like which player is most likely to earn an All-Star selection.
Well, we can do that one quickly. I mean, Jimmy, right?
It's Jimmy.
Probably Jimmy, but I mean, will he play enough games? Who knows?
All right.
All right, where do the Heat rank in your sort of rankings in the end? If your power rankings of NBA teams, where do you have Miami, Ron?
Probably, I think Phoenix, Utah, and Golden State are ahead of them. I mean, it's tough because right now, the Warriors are in a slump, but does that mean I think the Warriors are going to have the 25th best offense in the NBA by the end of the season? No. I think you're basically asking where do I rank them compared to other contenders, right?
Yeah.
I
don't
think
need
I
you to
have
rank
them,
all 30. Yeah.
right. I think I have them 6 or 7, probably around there.
Yeah.
I think the 3 top teams in the West are ahead of them. I think I'm still taking Milwaukee and Brooklyn ahead of them.
Yeah.
And then it's probably 6 or 7, something around there.
I'm with you. That's where I have them.
All right. Well, normally when you come on the show, we always ask you for a food take. I know you said you didn't have anything specialized. Did you come up with anything over that time? I know you said you would let us know in case you did. You didn't send anything via chat, but any hot food take?
No, just that I'm looking forward to eating a sandwich once this podcast is done. That's really all I've been thinking about.
Tell me about the sandwich. Tell us about
I don't know what
it's
going to be yet. I don't know what it's going to be yet.
We could tell you were distracted.
You
were distracted the whole time by the sandwich.
Yeah,
I know.
exactly. Yes.
Is it a self-made sandwich or a sandwich from the wild?
I will probably be venturing out for this sandwich, so I got a lot of options. Yeah,
brave choice, my friend.
Yeah.
Good for you. Well, that'll do it for today's show. Are you working on anything that you'd like to plug here on the show?
Just keep your eyes peeled. The Open Floor podcast, co-hosting that with the guy Michael Pina, Chris Herring's on there as well. We're giving out mid-season awards this week, and yeah, just stick on si.com. We got a lot of good writers there. I think people will enjoy what we're doing.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Remember that every episode is always free and available wherever you get the show. To make sure to subscribe to get the best coverage available. This is David Ramil signing off for now. Thanks for joining me, Wes, and thanks so much for joining us, Rohan.